Hi there, welcome to Boxing Deep Dive. I'm Lyndon Hosking, and great to have you along for another episode of Classic Fights. I've got a big one for you tonight. I'm going to bring in my co-hosts, and it's great to have Grant Tassie Brown and Peter Maniatis back on the job. And Tassie, mate, you're that's not the usual background up there. What's going on?
I'm just up here on Broad Beach, Gold Coast, mate, on holiday. So it's been good to be out of Melbourne after 2 years of lockdown, and good to be getting some sun, mate. So yeah.
That's good. How about you, Pete? You had a week off last week. What were you up to?
Yeah, no, just planning some boxing stuff, mate. But yeah, everything's coming on perfectly well, and great to be back and into 2022.
Yeah, it's great, mate. We had a ball last week with Skinny and saying we had plenty of good feedback about it, and we now know the route home from his gym, or his gym to his home. We followed him home, didn't we, Tassie, on the live feed?
Mate, we got a blow-by-blow live tour from the gym to home. It didn't take him too long. It was
we were about 3 minutes, didn't it?
Yeah.
So, but no, it's good to have Skinny as part of it. He's obviously very, very knowledgeable. He's an undersung great of Australian boxing, and it was great to hear his story and. Appreciate him being on, of course. But
I
spoke to his brother Hussey the other day too. Yeah, he loves you too,
right.
Pete. He thinks you're a good guy.
Yeah, that's right. We might
great
get Hussey on
boxing
at some
family,
stage.
great people.
Yeah, the Hussein family are great, Pete. So it was awesome to have a fresh set of opinions, and we can't wait to actually have Mike back if he ever decides to return home. Tassie, you haven't heard from him at all?
Mate, I've heard a whisper that he might extend his stay a bit longer. He's really enjoying Africa, mate, and he gets treated like royalty over there. And I think they actually do think he invented fire. I think they thought he invented fire. So he's just living like a king.
The big question is, mate, did the rain dance work? That's what I want to know.
Well, I want to know that too, but he's been hard to get hold of. Not much Wi-Fi in Zimbabwe, so he's yeah.
And Pete, we can't wait to hear all about on Thursday night what you've been up to with the shows. You mentioned before off air that you've got some shows coming up with the Kamakeo man, Joel Camilleri, if I got that right, and of course Hisham Shamrock as well. So I look forward to hearing a little bit about more on that on Thursday. But it is Classic Fights. This is what we're here for. We love this segment. We had a lot of good feedback last week over the Marquez and Rules. I won't say trilogy. It was a series, and it was actually, I must admit, it was actually a bit of I was pretty chuffed that on our Instagram post that Rafael Marquez actually liked our post, which was great. So he's watching.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he liked it.
Oh, wow.
Tagged you in it. So look, you got to appreciate the little things in life, and it's great to have one of the combatants actually like our posts. So we'll take what we can get at the moment. But this week,
can I tell you who I've been talking to actually? And I want to get him on the show soon, but follow me back, and we'll be talking in Messenger, mate. Jorge Larios.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know, Jorge Linares.
Oh, Linares. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I've been talking to Linares, and he's in Japan at the moment training for a fight, and he's a really cool dude, man. I said a shout out to him, and he messaged me back, and been having a bit of a chat, so I'm going to try to get him on soon.
Yeah, that would be awesome, mate. That would be fantastic for our show.
He's the best guy I've ever seen on the pads live.
Oh, you saw him live?
Yeah, me too, Pete.
Yep.
Yeah, he trains at Mr. Honda's gym. When Randy Petalcorum fought Ken Shiro for the world title, we were there for 10 days, and we were going to the gym every day and watching him. His brother, who's a cruiserweight, big guy, actually trains him, puts him through the pads, and he's with Mr. Honda and obviously Murata and all that team there, and Chocolito Gonzalez. But watching him on the pads is the best I've ever seen. And a great guy, real charismatic, good guy.
Well, that would be a coup to get him on, Tassie, so we'll stay tuned on that one. But again, it's Classic Fights.
Yeah.
It's your turn, Taz. We had to skip Pete. He'll have next week. Being away, you forfeit your right to pick it, so we'll get on to you next week, Pete. But Tassie, really looking forward to this one, mate. Who have you got?
So it's Anthony the Man Mundine versus Daniel GEALE, 2008 in Brisbane at Boondall Entertainment Centre. I was actually scheduled to be on the undercard, and I remember this night like it was yesterday. It was just action-packed. I think one of the best fights between two Aussies in Australian history. Two local boys. Each round was competitive. Each round was close. It was down to the wire. And as I said, mate, I had the best seats in the house because I was part of the show, so it was insane.
Well, Tassie, tell us about that quickly before we get into it. You're, as I said, you're scheduled to be on the undercard. You weigh in, your opponent weighs in. You get up the morning of the show. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so I put in a big training camp. I've been out of the ring for a couple of years, and I went up to Sydney with Billy Hussein. I dropped 10 kilos. I sparred Love More to Do, Victor Chinyanev, Mundine and Billy Dibble in a couple of weeks. I felt great. I had Luke Jackson with me, who was injured at the time. So Luke was sort of being my trainer at the time, sort of helping with Billy. I felt amazing. I weighed in. I met my opponent from Thailand. He just fought Will Thomason 6 months earlier. Anyway, shook his hand, weighed in, went home, had my feed and rehydrated. Felt great. Woke up the next morning to a lot of messages from everyone in Tassie saying we're watching live on. So it was on pay-per-view. I think I was a fight before Sonny Bill Williams. Yeah. And then George Reno rang me up. He said, Tassie, I've got very bad news. I said, what's that? He goes, look, your opponent tested positive for hepatitis C. You can't fight him. And I went, oh, my God. And he said, look, it's too late to find a replacement. And I was just shattered. And I rang up Mum and Dad and I tried to get the words out. I burst into tears. God's truth, I won't lie. I was just shattered, mate. The day of the fight, I trained hard. It was, it was the Mundine GEALE show, but, for me, it was the Tassie Brown show. It was on pay-per-view. I worked hard. And anyway, I took my bag to the fight just in case I got a replacement. We know what boxing's like. Someone could have jumped in. And Barry Michaels and Paul Upham were there. And they said, Tassie, you got a few words for the crew? And I said, yeah, I want to announce my retirement. And Barry goes, oh, Tassie, you're just a bit emotional. Have a sleep on it. I said, nah, I've been in the game since 1991. I don't think I'd get motivated again to go through all this preparation. I think at 31 years of age, this is it. So, and I stuck to my guns. That was it for me. It was just heartbreaking. I just really, it was just really, as most fighters know, every time there's a pull out, the day before or a week off, but not the day of. That was just, just next level.
It's almost unheard of, isn't it? There's nothing worse. If you're a boxer out there and you're watching, and you can probably sympathise with
but let's all hope that Thai boxer now, whoever he is okay, because that's a demoralising illness.
Yeah.
And let's just
he didn't even know. He didn't know he had it. Yeah, he didn't know he had it.
He's okay. That's the main thing, because that would have been a massive shock to him as well, and a life-changing.
It was, 100%.
Diagnosis. So it's not all about boxing.
Well, I'll get your opinion in a sec, Pete, but let's get on to the details of the fight here. It took place on May 27th, 2009. I think you might have said 2008, Tassie, but I'm pretty sure it was 09. Brisbane Entertainment Centre.
09,
Yeah, 12 rounds for the IBO Middleweight Title. Anthony Mundine had a 34-3 with 23 KO record. Daniel GEALE, who was the defending champion, was 21-0 with 13 KOs. Now, Pete, watching this, I remember watching it live at the time, and I actually, strangely enough, do remember Tassie getting on there and feeling so bad. Obviously didn't know who you were at the time, Tassie, but I remember thinking, geez, that's harsh. But Pete, the fight itself, even though I watched it live and it was a big event, big Australian fight, I probably didn't realise the magnitude of it till I watched it back a couple of days ago on YouTube. That, this was probably, I think they mentioned in the telecast, that this was the biggest domestic fight since Mundine Green, and looking back, they certainly had it right, didn't they?
They did. I remember it very well. I was covering it for SEN Live. I was going back to Mark Fine at the time. We had radio ringside. So they were crossing to me, and I was actually commentating the last round. And I was doing it from a pub. So I had to go in the corners that were not too loud, and peek it up at the screen so I'm not missing anything. It was a bit of a balancing act, but I remember just feeling that at the time, just a massive build-up, because they're both proud Indigenous fighters, and Mundine at that time had the profile and he was going to that international level, but you knew GEALE was coming and he was coming hard, and the chemistry for that fight was unbelievable, because they're both really good people. Away from boxing, Daniel GEALE's one of the nicest guys I've ever met, and Chock's very humble and quiet type of bloke. He'll give, Chock's the type of bloke, I've got no doubt if he saw you and you had a flat tyre on the road, he'd stop and help you put the tyre on. Where some people pretend they're good guys, they'd probably look at their mobile phone and keep driving, you know what I mean? But Chock wouldn't. That's the way I'd probably describe Chock.
And 100%, Peter.
Tassie, a little bit of conflict for you as well, I suppose, back in the day. I'm not sure how close you were to Chock back in the day, but obviously you're a massive fan, big friend of him. But he was up against a Tasmanian, mate, which is so. How was it for you then?
Yeah, who are you barracking for, Tassie?
No, not just a Tasmanian, but me and Daniel Gill travelled in the Tasmanian team for many years. Daniel come over from the boxing league, I think at 14, to the association. So Daniel had most of his fights in the league. He comes to the association. So from 96 onwards, we were in the Tasmanian team, and I was state captain on a couple of those trips. And Daniel was always, at 15, 16, he was just a beautiful boxer. Footwork, angles, just from day one, you knew he was going to be something. And a great, beautiful, just a humble guy, just a real nice kid. Probably corrupted him a little bit back then, I think. But look, Daniel was just a great guy. And then it went on to become, obviously just a superstar. Well, me and Anthony, become close in later years, and now, pretty much an inseparable bond. So at that time, and I had been in the training camp a bit with Mundine because I was sparring him as well. He liked to spar the littler guys closer to a fight for speed, like guys like me, Lenny Zapavinia, Cassides. And it was there. I just wanted a great fight. I really wasn't trying to be neutral because I love both guys and they're both dear friends of mine. Still are today. I talk to Daniel still, and me and Chuck talk regularly. So, but to be honest with you, I was that gutted about my own fight. I just wanted to watch a good fight. So I was ringside with Luke Jackson, and we were all in ahhing. Who won that round? Who won that round? Who won that round? And we were both. It was really just incredible fight. Doesn't get talked about enough, this fight. Aussie, you're talking about Ellis and Michaels. You're talking that style of fight. It was toe-to-toe, mate.
Yeah.
And you got to understand, Daniel Gill was an Olympian, and Anthony hadn't really fought as an amateur, so he had that advantage on him. And Gill had already been an IBO. This is for the IBO champ. So Gill was the champion in this fight. So, it was just amazing.
Yeah, it was. And Pete, before we look at the video there, it was interesting, wasn't it? Because, and we'll get into it at the moment, but the fight itself was such high quality. Again, I remember watching it live and thinking, this is a ripper fight, but watching it back, it was such an action-packed fight, and full credit to both guys because it was like the 12th round was the same pace as the first round. It was just an unbelievable fight, wasn't it? That's you, Pete.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, mate. I was waiting for Tazza to come in. Yeah, look, it was. They're both skillful fighters, and at the time, it was a good chemistry with the fights because Anthony was still believing he could win another world title, and he was starting to, in his mind, thinking of I need to get past guys like Gill, but he probably didn't realise how good Gill was at the time because Gill was ready in his own right to win a world title as well. So they both met at really a crucial part in their careers. Gill was just starting to peak, and Anthony was probably just starting to plateau. He didn't improve much after 2009, but he was still good enough to beat all the locals. But this was just a very interesting fight chemistry-wise.
All right, well, let's get into it, guys. We'll check it out. Just apologies for the quality of the video. It's really hard to actually find a good quality on YouTube, but we'll start it there. And it was really hard even with the highlights of it because pretty much the whole 12 rounds was one big highlight. So I tried to crop it as much as I could, but you can see there. I mean, Tassie, Chock was still at his peak here though, wasn't he? Pete mentioned he was probably just starting to decline, but watching the fight, he still had that speed and movement and timing, didn't he?
No, I think Peter was right. He was starting to decline a bit.
Yeah.
But I mean, he still was good enough to hold off a lot of these guys. Look, I don't think Chock and most of Australia knew how good Daniel Gill was. I did. I mean, Daniel was one of the best amateurs I had in many years. Commonwealth Games, gold medalist, went to the Olympics 2000. He was with Jeff Fennick for a lot of his pro career. He turned pro under Jeff, then he went to Bill Tracy in the Gary Francisco. Rest in peace to Bill Tracy, a great man as well at Grange. And he went with the Grange team and the guys there. And mate, he was. Yeah, this was a knockdown, and this was a big part of the fight. This knockdown. Yeah, it was a knockdown. Yeah, he was a left hook. He hooked off the jab. Only a flush knockdown, but it's still a 10-8 round. And that's going to play a big part in that fight, that knockdown. But
massive.
So I don't think a lot of people knew how good Daniel was. But they both boxed and fought. Power was a bit similar. Chuck maybe punched a little bit harder, but Daniel punches in bunches, and it's a very non-stop aggressive style. But yeah, look, mate, it was a very, very competitive fight all the way through.
Yeah, it was. And Pete, just as Tassie said before, just you look at Daniel GEALE, just the way he sort of glides in and out, and he almost floats in there, doesn't he? And do you think that Chock actually knew what he was up against? Obviously, leading up to this fight, he'd beaten a lot of Aussie fighters. Do you think he might have maybe underestimated GEALE just a little bit?
No, I don't think he did. Anthony Mundine would fight the best, always, the best available Australians. He never ducked any of them. You've got to give him that. Yep. He fought Sam Solomon when no one would fight Sam Solomon. He fought all the good, he fought Nato Ham, he can go through his record. He fought Shannon Taylor. He fought, I think he fought GEALE just after the Shannon Taylor fight in Wollongong. So, and I was at that fight. Rick Staler was actually training Shannon Taylor, but Mundine for me right there and then, he wasn't declining, but he wasn't improving. He was finding his plateau and he was trying to maintain that level to try and steal a world title where, as we mentioned before, Daniel GEALE, his roof or his ceiling was uncapped at this time. And we saw that in this fight. I don't think Mundine expected as hard a fight as he got. I think he probably thought he'd be cagey enough and experienced enough and classy enough to be able to do it a bit easier than what he did. But it was a great fight, and that's what boxing's all about. And that's why people knock Anthony Mundine, but you can't, because he gave so many Aussies a big payday, and that's what the sport's about. He kept the money in Australia, and he rewarded good Australian fighters with good domestic matchups.
Tassie, I did notice watching the fight that the one thing that did bother Mundine was the pace that Daniel GEALE set. I couldn't believe he fought 12 rounds just at, almost in fifth gear the whole way. Do you think that Chock, who was used to dictating the pace in most of his fights, was a little bit caught off by the pace that GEALE set?
Daniel was a fair bit younger than Anthony, so that would have been their game plan to push them old legs, and to have that Mundine fight every middle of every round. That would have been the game plan for sure. Look, I think this is one of probably Anthony's last great fight against, like where he really still showed against a top fighter. Because you got to remember, Daniel GEALE went on and won 2 world titles after this in Germany. After this fight, he goes wins 2 world titles. The same as Danny Green won the WBA title after that as well. So, that's a big thing for Anthony, the fact that these guys go on and Sam Solomon go on and win titles after he beats them. I think, definitely GEALE had a lot of advantages in this fight as him being younger. Mundine come down from super middleweight to middleweight for this fight. And also all the amateur career. GEALE had over 100 amateur fights, where Anthony had none. So, so I think it was Anthony's last really great fight. And don't forget, Daniel GEALE, his stock grew after this fight. When you fight Anthony, you become a star, pretty much. Yeah. So if you didn't know Daniel GEALE before this fight, you knew him after this fight.
Oh,
massively.
Definitely.
You agree with that, guys?
Yeah, 100%. And Pete,
yeah,
what do you make of the fight itself? And we'll go over the scorecards and at the end of it. But it was scoring the fight. How did you see it? You've got Mundine, who probably threw about half as many punches as what GEALE did, but was probably more crisp and maybe had the more effective punches. But then you had Daniel GEALE, who just had the work rate and the volume of punches. How did you make it when you were watching it? How were you scoring it as you were going?
It was a very tough fight to score, and it was always bordering on a razor-thin decision. I think that knockdown in round 2 or 3 was paramount with the judges, because that nips him around in front. So I think that's what that's what he got right at the end, was that real close decision. And it was a very hard fight to score. A lot of people thought GEALE won that fight. I actually did not. I thought Anthony won it because of the knockdown. I had him just winning the fight, but I would not have any problem at all with someone telling me that GEALE won that fight. Yeah. I wouldn't argue at all either. So it's just one of those. You see the punching volume of GEALE up against the accuracy and counters of Mundine, and if you see Mundine's style and the way he fights like an American fighter. He's got that international style. Where GEALE's GEALE's got that rat-a-tat, amateur, high-pressure, volume punching, which is great as well. But it just depends what you prefer. For mine, I just thought Anthony was just a touch more crispier, and the knockdown. If he didn't get the knockdown, Gil probably gets the fight, I think.
Yeah, we'll go over the scorecards at the end of it. But how did you make it, Tassie, watching it as far as the styles go? Were you more impressed by the way Anthony Mundine was fighting with sort of picking his punches a bit more, or was it the Daniel GEALE style where it was just work rate?
I always go with my heart at the time. So I was ringside with Luke Jackson and I think Nathan Nicolo, and I watched every single round from as close as you can get. And each round, we said who won each round. And at the end of the fight, they raised their arms, and I looked at Jacko and I went, Mundine by the knockdown. That was enough dissension. So it was back-to-back close but the knockdown for me just gave him, those 2 points, and I think that's what it came down to. Gill's style to Mundine's power shots. So I agree with the decision. I thought Mundine just won it. Barry Michaels, I think, said the same. But it was a great fight. If it went the other way or it was a draw, you wouldn't say anything else. But I go with my heart at the time, in the moment, with everyone around me, the crowd cheering. I gave it the chalk, just by that margin, including the knockdown.
Yeah, Pete, Taddy just mentioned about Barry Michael commentating, and it was interesting watching it again back with all the three commentators, and they all had it all different ways, and a lot of them scored even rounds, which is, I must admit, I don't really like to do, but I think Barry
I don't do that.
No,
I don't do that.
But Barry Michael said, I've got no choice but to call it even. I think you can always find a way to give someone the round. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know what you guys think, but I like to give the round to somebody. And but it was interesting to see that all three commentators all saw different rounds differently. And you can see the knockdown there. Just before you answer that, Pete, what did you think of that knockdown? Was it legit or was it a slip?
Yeah, look, it depends how you score. I mean, if someone touches and your glove touches the ground, it's a knockdown, regardless of the power. It's just, we chap a nest, so you're going to have to call it.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. But as I said, Pete, the other question I had was, just with, with the scoring of
even rounds. Even rounds. Look, you score an even round once every 25 to 30 rounds. If you're judging and you've got 3 10-round fights, you can score one even out of the 3 10-rounders. If you start scoring more than one, drop the pen and paper down and get lost. You shouldn't be a judge. Simple as that. And you shouldn't even score an even round. But if you do, they say 1 to 25 or 1 to 30. It is like you can't do any more than that. So if you've got there and it's a 12-round fight and you've scored 2 even rounds, it's completely ridiculous to be a judge. If you can't call it, don't be a judge.
Yeah, I suppose, Taz, it's
be
a
a
bit different
politician.
if you're a commentator watching it, because obviously you're commentating the fight, you're looking at different things, and the battle ends, and you've got to think of someone. It's probably easy, we'll just score that even. But yeah, Pete's right, isn't he? That the judge, and I think, thankfully, the judges in this fight, I don't think actually had even rounds. So, I suppose that was one good thing anyway, wasn't it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, but look, no matter what, it should just be remembered. As I said, it doesn't get mentioned enough as one of the greatest all-Australian fights in history. In the history of Australian boxing, this is one of the best between two guys, both world champion level fighters. Mundine, a former world champion, Daniel GEALE, a future world champion. And that's what it should be remembered at. It just is an amazing fight between two great all-Australian, all-Indigenous fighters.
It was amazing, wasn't it, Pete, that we mentioned before about the Australian fighters that Chock actually gave a chance. And going through his record, it's amazing to think, just how many, pretty much every single Aussie worth his salt at that time that Chock actually fought and beat. It's an amazing career.
He even gave Gaynor Jackson a chance from New Zealand.
Yep.
And Gunnar went the distance. He actually fought a good fight. But yeah, Rob Medley.
Yeah, I was at that fight.
Ryan Waters. I mean, Nader Ham. We can just go on and on. I mean, it's brilliant. And early on in his career, Bajero and all
Can I say something, boys? If Anthony Mundine never took up boxing, we probably wouldn't be doing this show. Because Australian boxing would be nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
You take away Mundine the last 20 years, and what have we got to talk about, really? Not much.
Yeah. Yeah,
Not
we
just
obviously-
because of his fights,
Yeah.
he gave the undercard fighters, all the up-and-comers, the chance to be... George Gambosa's fought about 6 times on chalk undercards. Check box rec.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, 100% agree, mate. Well, here's the decision here, and we'll read out the scorecards there in a sec here. There's Chock obviously well deserving of his victory. The official scorecards was 116-113 for Mundine. That was Derek Milham. Richard Green had it 115-112 for GEALE, and Marcus McDonald had it 114-113. So my personal view is, and I seem to always go against you guys, I actually thought Daniel GEALE scraped through by the skin of his teeth. I had him winning by 1 point. I had it 114-113. I had it 7 rounds to 5, and then the knockdown for Mundine brought it back to 1. But having said that, so many close rounds. It could easily have been the other way. So I think the interesting thing here is, Petty, if the knockdown hadn't have been called, and I think I'm with you, Tassie, I think it was 100% a knockdown, but maybe if the Mundine one had have been called a knockdown too, the fight would have actually been a draw, because that 114-113 would have become 113-113. So it's amazing how one instance in a fight can have such a dramatic result on or effect on the fight, isn't it? Pete?
Yeah, yeah, of course. It's one of those things where, yeah, that call there just absolutely makes a difference between a draw and a result. So, but I guess that's boxing, and everyone's got different opinions. And we've got, if you just say Daniel GEALE won that fight, I've got no arguments to say that he didn't win the fight.
Yeah. Pete, Tassie, they went on and had another fight in 2013, and this time was very definitive, wasn't it? Daniel GEALE got the job done, and Chock was obviously 4 years later in his career, so if he was starting to decline here, he was well and truly declined by then, but GEALE made absolutely no mistake about it in the rematch, did he?
No, Daniel had already gone over to Germany, won the world title. You know what I mean? Was at the peak of his powers where Mundine had declined. And yeah, look, I don't think Mundine should have fought him in the rematch. To be honest with you, because I just knew Daniel was on fire back then, and Anthony. I'm not sure if he'd been knocked out by Garth Woods during that time or not, but I think he'd probably have been. And I mean,
yes, he had.
I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look, I mean, look, he wasn't at his best when, Anthony, obviously believes in himself, and that you can't tell him any different. But he was, fully. But I mean, look, but I mean, he done the rematch, and obviously GEALE. I was at that fight too. It was. Anthony had his moments still, but I mean, yeah, look, it wasn't the greatest fight, that one. I was ringside for that as well, but I mean, but Daniel obviously was at his peak then.
Yeah, we can see. You can see there.
I think Jeff Malcolm.
Yeah, you can see there that Garth Wood, the 2 fights there, so he had that knockout, and it was really, he never really recovered after that, did he? So he obviously won the rematch. You can see there, he had the fight in Vegas against Bronco McCart, had the rematch there with Daniel GEALE. Had the win over Shane Mosley, which was good, followed up with a few wins there, but then the losses started to come. Joshua Cloddy had the win over Rabchenko, obviously, which was great, but
yeah, it was a good win. I was there too for that
then
one.
He had the losses too.
What a performance against Joshua Cloddy. How brave was Anthony going down 6 or 7 times. That the respect just went even more. I mean, what a warrior! He just refused to go down.
Yeah, he had heart, Chock, and you can see there the losses started to mount up. After Hatley, he lost to Danny Green, had the win over Brown, and then obviously lost his last 3 fights. And let's not talk about the last.
Well, he got ripped off against the Danny Green. He won that fight in Adelaide.
I agree. I agree with that one. Whereas Daniel GEALE, well, that was really just the start for him, because you can see there he beat Sebastian Sylvester for the IBF middleweight title a couple of years later. Then Felix Stern, when he unified it, obviously he defended the IBF title against Mundine in the rematch. I thought he was really stiff to lose against Barker in America. I thought he actually won that fight. And then, he came up against Golovkin and Cotto, which was, that's another feather in his cap, even though he lost those fights. Just to fight those 2 guys was amazing. And went out a little bit disappointing, a lot like Chock did when he was stopped in 2 rounds by Ronald Quinn, which was obviously no disgrace in that. So it was a bit of a shame the way they both went out, but I think with both you guys, I think you'll agree that these 2 such an underrated fight in Australian history because along with the Green Mundine fight, I think it was probably the Alice Michael fight, probably in that mix of the top 3 Australian fights of all time. What do you think, Taz?
Definitely in the argument, mate. Definitely. I mean, Michael Ellis was next level, and the Mundine Green fight was the biggest fight in Australian history. We all waited for that for 5 years. And this one probably wasn't as anticipated, but it turned out to be a cracker. It was a better fight than the Green Mundine because it was more competitive.
I think so too. Yep.
So, but as I said, mate, in every one of these fights, it's all Anthony Mundine's name versus whoever. He gave boxing mouth to mouth for 2 decades. 2 decades, Australian boxing. Love him or hate him. If you don't give him any respect that he deserves, you're an absolute bum.
Yeah, no, 100% agree, mate. And I think he's one of those fighters, Pete, that now that he's actually gone, you realise what we actually had and how healthy boxing was back then. And not just Chock, of course. He was probably the king of Australian boxing at the time, but obviously we had Danny Green around that time, and you throw in the Shannon Taylors and all those types of guys, and obviously then it was Jeff Horn, and he really was the king of Australian boxing for quite some time, wasn't he? For a long time, probably 2 decades.
No, he was. And, I mean, look, he was charismatic as well. He was a crossover guy. He wasn't only just a boxer. He was a very good rugby player and played State of Origin. And his dad was a legend as well. And, they're good family people as well. I mean, they're real down-to-earth people. I remember when he fought Lester Ellis in Melbourne in 2002. And Coda Nass actually came to an event. I had an event a week and a half before his. If you go on BoxRec, you'll check. And I had too many fights back then. I had 10 local fights, and Melbourne only was suited for 7. So I threw 3 fights on Anthony. I threw Nadal Hidara and Brando De Niro. I threw Dwayne Crowe on, and I threw David Deek and Nick Lund on there as well.
Nick Lund knocked him out.
David Deek and Nick. Yeah, but David was a favourite. So I got on well with Anthony's mum. Called me at the time, and they couldn't get insurance for that event because that event was just after 9/11, where the Twin Towers got bombed, and no one wanted to promote anything. And I ended up finding a company called Showtime, and they were doing events, and I got them onto them. They were expensive, but I was using them. So I helped them out with Keith Ellis to actually do that show, and they were real nice people, and they were great to deal with. And
awesome.
Yeah.
No, that's great, mate. We'll end it there. Let's again, hats off to both guys. I think we all know how great Mundine was, but I think this is another example of how great Daniel GEALE was, and I think he does get sort of forgotten about a little bit as far as the greats go. But Pete, we're going to give you a crack at it next week. You don't have to mention it now who you've got unless you can think of it, but you're up next week, so maybe have a good think about who you've got, and we'll look.
Yeah, I'm going to go an old school. I'm going to go Tony Mad Dog Miller versus Paul Ferrari.
Okay.
This is just to educate a lot of the people that are coming through. Tony Mad Dog Miller fought Jeff Fennick and was a great Australian fighter, and Paul Ferrari was Commonwealth champion for 15 years and fought Carlos Zarate. And that fight was promoted by the Brizzy brothers. And I'm not on BoxRec or anything. I'm just off the top of my head. I'd say it was 1986 at the Preston Town Hall.
Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. If you go, and it was a cracking fight.
Yeah.
And I was actually there, so that's why it meant a bit more to me as well. So,
all right. Well,
and Paul's a good friend of mine. So, yeah, so that's the fight for mine. Tony Mad Dog Miller, Paul Ferrari, Preston Town Hall, 2 great Aussie fighters.
All right, done. We'll lock it in for next week. So thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Tassie, we'll let you get back to all the fun up there, and we'll talk to you next week.
But we might, Lyndon, I was just going to say, we might not have footage of that. If there's no footage of it, what do we do? Should I pick another fight?
If we haven't got it, we'll work something out. We might get them, we'll find it somewhere. If not, well, we'll get another one. It's all good. We'll work something out. But hopefully we can find vision. All right, boys. We'll catch you next week.
Okay.